The PAP-1, another bootleg video game console that I stumbled across on eBay for about 25 bucks and decided to check out, mainly because this thing is a total mystery. Other knockoff consoles that I've looked at were blatant ripoffs of the Wii with abysmal motion controls, and I've got an actually pretty useful NES emulator, but the PAP-1 is a literal black box. The ads on the console's packaging make zero mention of what kind of games are loaded onto it, so I don't know what I'm walking into here. The console ships with a single knockoff PlayStation controller. The D-pad is a set of 4 buttons with no central pivot, and they feel rubbery with the input. There are control sticks, but they feel way more stiff and awkward to use than a regular controller. They feel woefully unreliable. The other buttons are clicky as hell, and fresh out of the box, this controller didn't even work with the system. A prong in the Player 1 controller port was bent out of place to where the controller wouldn't plug into it until I repaired the damn thing myself. The console also doesn't come with any of the hardware that you need to get it running. It has no HDMI cable to connect it to the TV, and its power cable leaves off at a USB plug. It has no AC adapter. So I tried plugging in my own AC adapter. I tried a few actually, and the console still doesn't work. It just sits on a black screen that slowly turns gray, trying to start up before shutting off again perpetually. I eventually lucked out and realized that it would actually consistently turn on if I plugged the power into the front of my PlayStation 4, like the worst add-on since the Sega CD. But none of those hardware problems are actually the worst part. See, on Rerez's advice, I checked the instructions that came with the PAP-1 before using the damn thing, and reading these directions may actually have saved my life. The PAP-1's directions warn you not to leave it plugged in if it's not actively in use, or unspecified damage will occur to the system. This is almost certainly code for crap box will melt and burn your house down if you leave it plugged in for too long. In fact, I repeatedly noticed that if I played the console for more than an hour, it started to get warm. Congratulations! You just bought a fire hazard! When the system boots up, it plays the startup jingle from my Windows 95 computer of all things, and oh great, the menus are written in Chinese. Great! So just to recap, this console doesn't work unless you have another modern system to piggyback off its electricity. You have to bring your own cables, manual repair work is required due to shit construction, it has above zero odds of actually killing you, and the menus aren't written in your language. So you jump through all those hoops, and after all that, what games do you actually get at the end of this diarrhea rainbow? Wait, holy shit, really? This thing has PlayStation 1 games on it? No, there is no way in hell that any of these... These games actually work! And it's not just PS1, there are arcade games, Genesis, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance. This crap box actually works! I played several of the PlayStation 1 games loaded onto the system. Dino Crisis, Tarzan, Spider-Man 2, Resident Evil 3, Medal of Honor, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis. All of them seem to work great! Tarzan even detected faux memory card data from the other PlayStation 1 games that I played. Miles and I played through the entire Alien vs. Predator arcade game, and aside from a few instances where the sound cut out for like half a second at a time, this spectacular and gorgeous game ran flawlessly. You can even play 2-player games because you can plug other controllers into the USB ports, and they'll work! I always wanted to try Splatterhouse 3. Perfectly responsive controls, creepy-ass dark stylized graphics. It's just as mediocre as the rest of the series. And Scat! I loved that game, but I lost it when my Wii's hard drive died. It's a difficult game, but unique and hella fun. What kind of black magic is this? The PAP-1 has 37 games from the PlayStation 1, in addition to several arcade cabinets, several Neo Geo games, and hundreds of games each for the NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, Sega Master System, Game Gear, and the Genesis. Your loadout may vary since the system uses an SD card, but my PAP-1 came loaded with 4,040 games! And sure, a few dozen of the games are on here twice, but the console still has a few thousand unique titles. I eventually found out that there are language options if you figure out how to pull up the system settings, So now I can actually read what all the menus do. In addition to the games being sorted by platform by default, you can filter out games by console, you have a history function of the last 10 games you've played, and there's a favorites list where you can mark games to jump to them quickly. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way that you can only mark 80 favorites before it starts kicking entries off the list at random, and with over 4,000 games on the console, only being able to mark 2% is a pretty heavily curated list. There's also a title search function that hilariously doesn't work if the console language isn't set for English. I remind you that it ships defaulted to Chinese. If you're playing an NES game, you can remap the buttons and have 2 of the face buttons serve as turbo buttons, but bizarrely you only have these options for the NES titles, not any of the Game Boys that also only use 2 face buttons. When you're in a game, you can pull up a system pause menu by pressing start and select at the same time, which you can either use to return to the main menu or to save and load save states. I tested several games and the console seems to hold save states just fine. Plus, it actually holds save data for games that normally have battery backups or save to a memory card. So 4,000 games that work, including a ton of rare titles, on one gadget for 25 bucks. Sound too good to be true? Maybe not. To check the emulation, I played a lot of games that I'm intimately familiar with. I played all the way through Metroid Zero Mission, because I'm waiting for physical copies before I get Metroid Prime Remastered, and the game ran pretty much flawlessly. But normally once you beat Zero Mission, it unlocks the original Metroid as an extra, and trying to play that crashes the game. Although frankly, the lack of the original Metroid improves the system's value to me. Next I took a look at Zoda's Revenge, probably my favorite NES game, and while the emulation seems to work perfectly fine here, the controller's spongy-ass D-pad buttons keep throwing off my movement. Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, Sonic Battle, any game that heavily uses diagonal movement feels super sluggish even if they seem to be running perfectly fine, and I think the controller's to blame. You can plug other controllers into the system's USB ports, but systems like this are sold as cheap alternatives to the big expensive consoles, not in addition to them, so I need to judge how it works with its own native hardware. Back to Zoda's Revenge though, I came back to it later to find that the PAP 1 had wiped my save file. So I have to use save states everywhere because I can't count on the console to keep my save data. Great. Sonic 2 at a glance is running fine, but the physics just feel slightly off. And for some reason I can't duck to ball up and damage enemies, or I can only get it to work every now and then. Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland has severe input lag, which is bizarre because all the other Game Boy Advance games that I tried didn't have this problem. The Revenge of the Sith Game Boy Advance game works great! Although I did see a slight problem with the graphics of the opening crawl. I'm sorry, I don't know how to translate solid yellow cubes into text. Okay, now I'm curious. The Attack of the Clones game, the opening crawl looks fine, and Apprentice of the Force, yep, yellow blocks again. How about Batman Vengeance on the Game Boy Advance? Graphics bug during fades to black, opening FMV plays way too fast, and the text is all solid boxes again. Good thing I've already played the physical cart several times over to know what all this is anyway. But when I got to the overhead Robin stages, I finally figured out what the problem is with the controls. Say that I'm pushing right and then I shift my thumb over to move upward, the controller screws up to think that I'm still moving right. The construction on this controller is so cheap that if I don't take my thumb completely off the D-pad, the controller will keep reading the first direction that was pushed. So that's why overhead perspective games are playing like ass. Guess I need to stick to side scrollers like Ninja Gaiden, which works, but the music is sped up like the orchestra's on crack. The games that seem to have the most problems are the Super Nintendo titles. Super Castlevania 4 has about a second's delay to all the sound effects. In fact, every Super Nintendo game that I tried has a delay to the sound. Castlevania 4 plays perfectly well, but it's endlessly distracting to hear everything about a second after you see it. And Doom on the Super Nintendo has the sound lag and severe input lag. It feels top to bottom like it barely friggin' works. No, strike that. It feels like I'm playing on Stadia. May it rest in piss. They added the Game Boy Advance port of Doom if you really need your Doom fix, but it's ungodly pixelated and it didn't hold on to my save data, so no luck there either. Guess we finally found a console that can't run Doom. The Shadow, an unreleased Super Nintendo game licensed on the superhero movie, the enemies keep glitching into pixelated nonsense. But again, unreleased game, so that might not be the PAP 1. Clock Tower, the legendary horror game, is on here, but there's a glitchy white line that keeps appearing and disappearing through the middle of the screen. You can play the game perfectly well, but the visual glitch is ungodly annoying and distracting, which is a shame because I'd love to play this game, and I just died from looking into a mirror. Never mind. There's one Super Nintendo game that runs really well on the PAP 1, though. A little too well, in fact, and that game is Star Fox. From the game's opening sequence alone, I can tell that Star Fox is running much faster than it does on the Super Nintendo Classic. Too bad it's in Japanese, and too bad the game's difficulty was probably specifically balanced around running slower. But I guess if you're a Star Fox wizard out for a steeper challenge, here's your chance. Now if only Star Wars Flight of the Falcon were on here, it could use the performance boost. Some of the games don't work at all, like they're running the most broken ROMs that the makers could track down. X-Men on NES loads up to a white screen. The game is running, but I can't see a damn thing. This may be a positive though, because it stops you from playing X-Men on NES. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix on Game Boy Advance doesn't work at all. It loads up with glitchy discolored graphics, and trying to start up the game just reloads the studio logos in the main menu. Why specifically Order of the Phoenix when it's right next to 3 other Potter games on the same platform that work fine? I don't know. There are plenty of Dragon Ball games on the system, but almost all of them are RPGs written in what I presume to be Japanese. So if you can't read the language, they're pretty much completely useless. Oh hey, WarioWare Twisted is on the console! Hey, did you know that WarioWare Twisted's cartridge has a tilt sensor to detect you rocking the system back and forth, and that without that sensor, there is no way to play the game? I'd say the makers of the PAP 1 didn't know that. Gyromite's on here too, over 700 NES games to pick from, and you pick one of the 2 that needs Rob the Robot plus accessories to function. And one of the Game Boy games that they listed is the interface for a Game Genie. And no, it doesn't let you cheat with any of the other games on the system. This is probably a signed confession that they just started grabbing whatever ROMs they could find past a certain point. One of the sillier mistakes on the system is the preview images that appear on the menu. Most of the games have a blank card with the console's name, but a select number of games have preview images pulled straight out of the maker's ass. Pretty much any Punisher game uses promotional material from the Netflix series. One of the Contra games has a fan poster of Schwarzenegger and Stallone teaming up to fight Xenomorphs, and my beloved Alien vs. Predator arcade has the poster from the crappy movie! The names on the console aren't always correct either. Did your eyes light up at the sight of a game called Dynamite Batman? Well, it's just Batman Return of the Joker on the NES. Super Mario Quest is Final Fantasy Legend. How the hell did they arrive at that wrong title? And Empire Strikes Back on NES is actually the Japanese version of A New Hope. You know, the version where you fight Darth Vader on a sandcrawler and he turns into a scorpion? Yeah, that actually happened. And I think this game's been modified because the Famicom Star Wars is supposed to be an insanely hard 3 lives no continues murder fest, but I've died like 20 times without losing, and I think a force power somehow skipped several levels. Oh sure, Luke can fly 2 seconds after touching a lightsaber, but Leia flies and everyone loses their minds! This isn't the only time that this happens either. There's a modified NES Bomberman that lets you start with craploads of items all the way up to being invincible, and it also swaps out the cut enemies for screaming faces. And the mod is credited to a guy who calls himself Serial Killer. I'm getting the bad vibes again. The Stallone Schwarzenegger poster is for Super Contra 5, which doesn't exist. This is a mod of G.I. Joe, the Atlantis Factor, to give you unlimited ammo and more health. Now, I had never even heard of the Atlantis Factor, but I was able to deduce it with my mad detective skills, because the opening crawl of this Contra game is about G.I. Joe and Cobra! Dumbass! Kage is actually Shadow of the Ninja, only modified to where you're permanently invincible and always have projectile attacks. Who's going around making kid mode hacks of these balls hard games? But the most curious case to me is Kirby Bowling. Kirby Bowl doesn't exist. This is Kirby's Dream Course for the Super Nintendo. This is golf, not bowling. But the preview image appears to be a screenshot from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate of Kirby copying Sephiroth. If this is a legit screenshot, and it appears to be, then this console had to be made after December of 2020 when Sephiroth was added to the game. This damn console's only 2 years old at most, and they couldn't get better components to keep it from catching on fire? I'm nitpicking the hell out of this console and cherry-picking all the problems that I found, because it's kind of my self-appointed job. But in all honesty, I tried several dozen games on the system, and the bulk of them ran extremely well. I'm just saying that you can't necessarily trust that every game on here is 100% accurate to its real-life release. But if you're not too picky, there are tons of games in a wide variety of genres on the system that play great and are tons of fun. If the console wasn't so poorly built that forgetting to unplug it would brick the console at best and ignite it at worst, I'd have no problem recommending this thing. Hell, I'll likely be coming back to the PAP one for years to come because there are a lot of interesting games on here that I have to spend a lot of time and a fortune tracking down to play otherwise. For instance, did you know that there was a Game Boy Color version of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine? Yeah! And it sucks too! It's an overhead puzzle platformer adventure game, but it plays super slowly, the inventory sucks, and you only get one life with no continues or checkpoints. Fall once from confusing level layouts or from a minor mistake, and you have to start the stage over. Also, did not know there's a Game Boy Color game of Atlantis the Lost Empire. It's a solid little side-scroller where you cycle between characters that all have their own abilities to bypass obstacles, but it suffers from where the hell do I go syndrome, like the opening level where we're just trying to cross Whitmore's mansion to hear his pitch for the voyage, and the damn place is a maze where Vinny has to dynamite the hell out of the guy's house to get to the end. Dude, what the hell? A Bug's Life on Game Boy, the one game that I've ever sold to a used game store because about a minute in you hit a mushroom that I've never been able to figure out how you cross. Decades later, and I still got nothing. I may have found an actual good Superman game, Countdown to Apocalypse on the Game Boy Advance. It's an isometric action game where you have unrestricted access to all of Superman's powers. No energy bars ruining the fun, and they actually explain why all the enemies can hurt Superman. And it stays balanced because the heat vision has great range, but is hard to line up a shot, encouraging punches or ice breath for the area effect. Although heat visioning all the bad guys to death, I may be turning him into Homelander. I found some Batman Game Boy games. Batman the Animated Series on Game Boy is not only a stellar side-scroller with fun wall jumping and grapple mechanics, it also has great music and a damn impressive opening cutscene replicating the show. And then on the other end of the spectrum is Batman the Movie licensed game, where Batman's just straight up running around shooting people with a gun! What the hell? I mean, it was weird in Return of the Joker where Batman just ran around shooting people, but at least there you could say it was some kind of gadget launcher. Here, the sprite has him holding a gun, he's firing bullets at people, they flat-ass turned Batman into the Punisher! If Zack Snyder grew up with this Game Boy game, a whole lot of things would make a lot more sense. And remember a few years ago when I did the video game tie-ins for Batman Forever? I played the Genesis version, which played like hot garbage, then I played the Game Boy port, which played like flaming hot garbage, and now I present to you the Sega Game Gear version, a port of the Game Boy release, and it, good God, this may be the single ugliest video game that I've ever seen in my life! The backgrounds are just splotches! The coloring is as basic as it gets. They couldn't be bothered to draw floors, so Batman is just perpetually floating out in empty space! My eyes want to vomit, but they don't know how! And of course, it plays like trash. It's a port of one of the worst games ever made. We could spend all week going through random games, but not every game on the system is an officially released title. As is common for bootleg systems, there are a fair number of homebrews, ROM hacks, and bootleg games loaded onto the system, primarily for the NES and the Sega Genesis. So to close out this video, I think I'll show you some of the homemade games on the console that'll make you laugh, scratch your head, and ask what were they thinking? Harry Potter on the Sega Genesis! Or rather, Harry Potter and the Siren of Weason? I can't read that subtitle. Harry walks around an isometric environment where all the directions on the controller are tilted 45 degrees. It's a massive pain in the ass to control. You're dropped into a small map with some random characters chasing you. A guy in an Egyptian headdress, a guy who's blue. I've seen the Grim Reaper hopping around too. Is he supposed to be a Dementor or something? The object of the game turns out that you have to collect little floating balls throughout the stage, and then it takes you to the next level, the Forbidden Forest, which doesn't look all that forbidden since it's full of camping tents. There's no way to chase after these balls since they move the same speed as you, so you pretty much have to rely on pure luck to run into orbs on paths where you can catch them without running into the random menagerie of enemies. 3 lives, no continues, broken shit game. Super Donkey Kong 99! Hey, did you ever want to play Donkey Kong Country on the Sega Genesis? No? Well, too bad! Someone made it anyway, and it sucks! Donkey Kong can't tumble into enemies anymore, so you can barely attack unless you jump on everyone's head with shitty hit detection that's heavily biased against you. And it gets worse. The devs apparently just didn't like Diddy Kong, so you die in one hit and get sent back to start everywhere that you go. What is the actual point of making a Donkey Kong Country game if you strip out most of its mechanics? Zombie High is a bootleg of an unfinished Sega Genesis game. Nobody knows why it was cancelled, but I guess it's because it sucks! You play as a kid running the halls of a high school shooting zombies with a slime gun. The sprites are so big and slow that it's tough to avoid damage, and the jumping barely feels like it works. But only a few minutes in, you run into what I assume to be an army of zombie lunch ladies blocking the way forward, and they're completely immune to your weapon, and you can't run past them since they insta-kill you by touch. And if you run out of lives, you go back to the start with no health so that you can die again for good measure. I thought maybe the big, clearly marked doors in the background led to levels where you'd find an item to clear out the exit, but I couldn't find any way to go through those doors. I can't figure out how to get past the first room, and like a man going in for a colonoscopy, I'm out of shits to give. Another unreleased bootleg on the system is Barbie Vacation Adventure. You pick a location on the map, and then you do a crappy, overlong minigame. Like on the beach, you play a slow, badly controlling game of volleyball, or go diving for gems. Nothing damages you, you can't drown, it's painfully slow, and you aren't allowed to leave until you get over 100 jewels. Sometimes games are abandoned for good reason. Sonic Amy Rose. It crashes every time that I launch it, but there are way more Sonic hacks on the system. Sonic Chow Walker. It's the original Sonic the Hedgehog game with Sonic replaced by a baby Chow piloting a mech. This hack is so half-assed that you'll see the Chow morph back into Sonic for tons of basic sprites. Cute, but pointless. Then there's Sonic Dr. IKS, another mod of Sonic 1 that turns Sonic red and screws with the levels. You'd think that this was a creepypasta game given they renamed Green Hill into Green Hell, but it's just flat out broken. I have yet to clear the first level for constantly glitching and getting stuck in the environment, and it's always in a different spot. This game's just unplayable. Then there's Sonic Eraser, which is a really crappy puzzle game where it never feels clear how you're rotating or flipping pieces due to crap animations, and if one player pulls off a good combo, the other gets frozen for ages and royally screwed. Yeah, I can see why Dr. Robotnik is the one who actually got a puzzle game made. Sonic 5 on the NES. Where was Sonic 4? Who cares? In addition to running way slower than Sonic should, the graphics are butt-fugly, and critical items like springs are colored like they're part of the background, which makes them really hard to see. If you so much as graze a wall in midair, you fall immediately, and less than a minute into it, I got stuck because they didn't check whether Sonic can actually clear basic jumps or not. Here's Somari, a Sonic knockoff starring Mario who can spin dash and balls up when jumping now. Only you get shot from out of nowhere so often that you'll drop dead pretty much instantly. And then there's Jurassic Boy 2, a Sonic game but on the NES and starring a dinosaur. Jurassic Boy can't spin dash and some enemies you just can't attack at all, but you run so close to the right side of the screen that you'll never be able to tell where you're going, so you'll get hit a whole lot of times. But probably the most fascinating Sonic hack on the system is Sonic and Crackers. Please tell me that Crackers is not an actual Sonic character. Sonic and Crackers has two gameplay modes. One has Sonic and Tails wandering an empty overhead map with nowhere to go, and the other is an actual Sonic game. Sonic and Tails are connected by some kind of energy rope that you use to navigate levels, like you'll come to jumps that Sonic can't make on his own, so you pick up and throw Tails over there, and the rope carries Sonic up to where you need him. The tether system is interesting, but it also barely works. Sonic and Tails will just randomly slingshot each other back and forth in unpredictable ways, and a lot of times when you try to jump, you'll pick up Tails instead because he was standing too close to you. And that's not even counting all the times that Tails got stuck and I couldn't go any further forward because Tails wouldn't move! Tails, come on, man, it's just a little jump! I can't move unless you jump up here!
No!
Seriously, I'm getting pulled back for- I'm gonna have a seizure!
I want to find a ramp!
Don't jump up here!
I want a ramp I can use as a ramp!
I'll slap the bitch out of you! I think it's safe to say that Sonic and Crackers is a rough proof of concept alpha that was abandoned. The first level feels endless and meandering, and I've yet to run into a single enemy. And given that the physics are so botched that Sonic and Tails can stand upright on vertical walls like Spider-Man, giving up was definitely the right call. But Sonic's not the only one with ROM hacks. In addition to Mario games that we'd like to forget, like Mario is Missing, there are several Super Mario Bros. Hacks on here too. Super Mario Bros. 4 has Mario curling into a ball to attack enemies. Super Mario Bros. 6 and 9 are just Tiny Toon Adventures and Adventure Island where the players turning into Mario is literally the only change. Super Mario 14 is a kung fu game with Mario's face plastered over it where you use a stick to launch and flip off of ledges. It's actually kinda cool. I wish I knew the original game. Super Mario 16 has Mario as a caveman hucking axes at people. You can't attack while jumping, which pretty much ruins the whole game. Super Mario BT spawns you into an underwater level loaded with dead ends. But if you do manage to beat that one level, the game ends. Why? Mario TV is some kind of game show with a spinner where you win money and nothing in the interface makes any sense. And Kamikaze Mario Brothers is my eyes! My eyes! Mario is butt-ass naked, complete with nards dangling if you grab a super mushroom. What in the name of hell? You spawn in a small room with nowhere to go. Is there an actual game here? Princess Peach is in this room. Do I have to plow her to get any further? How would I do that anyway? And then there's Kamikaze Mario Brothers 2. Mario's still naked, but now you have to slide through a block that isn't solid and grab invisible poles to swing from. I'm sure somebody is laughing their ass off that this exists, but they can suck my ass! There are probably some hacks on the console that I'm missing. Not every game jumps out just from the title as much as Master Fighter 2 The World Warrior. It's a homebrew of Street Fighter 2 on NES. It only has 5 characters, the hit detection is garbage, and the AI seems to perfectly counter everything that I do. But it has a Chun-Li ass shot, so... Okay, want some more homebrew Street Fighter? Well, you're in luck! Street Fighter 12 Peoples! A homebrew for the NES where your first opponent, Ryu, is a cheap turd-ass that does nothing but spam projectiles and special moves. Street Fighter 16 Peoples! It's the same game with Zangief and Dhalsim. Ryu is still a cheating shitball, but this time I could use Dhalsim's stretchy arms to level the playing field, dickweed! Street Fighter 3 12 Peoples! This one has Mario as a playable character. Mario with so few animations that his fighting looks like glitch warfare. Seriously, you go to the trouble of making a custom game, but you can't be bothered with the animations? Street Fighter 5 10 Peoples! This one has friggin' Goku as a playable character. Except, in a letdown of epic proportions, selecting Goku just as you play as Ryu. And just to add insult to injury, the hack still plays like shit. Is Street Fighter not your bag? Well, how about Tekken 2 on NES? If you have a Turbo B button, you can kick infinitely and win everything, and the 8-bit graphics makes the characters look gloriously stupid. Oh god, my hip! I broke my hip! VR Fighter vs. Taken 2 on the Genesis. The hack's so nice it's on here twice. It's supposed to be Virtua Fighter vs. Tekken, but if we change the names, Sega won't sue us. There is such a long animation into each attack that Kazuya stun locks me as soon as the fight starts, and I can't get a single hit off. Douche canoe! And there's a Fatal Fury NES homebrew that actually plays pretty well. This one's cool. There are several bootleg Pokemon NES games on here too. Pokemon 2000 has a Charmeleon fighting dudes hucking boomerangs, you know, as Charmeleon do. There's a foreign one where Pikachu is modded into random games like Candy Crush, DDR, and Pac-Man. Pokemon Blue, they didn't even try to disguise as just wacky races on the NES since the cutscenes show Dick Dastardly and the text flat out tells you that you're playing as Muttley. But you get into the actual game and... what is that? Is that supposed to be a Wartortle if you just squint really hard at it? Results the same, this isn't a Pokemon game, and neither is Pokemon Green. Pokemon Green is another platformer where you play as... Clefairy? Not to question the wisdom of someone who swaps random Pokemon sprites into obscure games for fun, but, Clefairy is pink, you chowderhead! It's not like there's a shortage of green Pokemon that you could use, and a few minutes in you see a blue Clefairy imprisoned beneath the earth. Keep trying out new colors, maybe eventually you'll make one that's pink! Like who the hell makes blue and green recolors of characters that are supposed to be pink? Mickey Mouse 7. It's well animated, but you don't have a health bar, your attack is friggin' useless, and early in the second level you come to a jump that I'm not sure you can make. There's no platform, no flight item, no long jump that I'm aware of, and I can't find a way to grab and shimmy across that rope. I don't know how to progress, and I don't care. Tom and Jerry 3. I had a feeling this wasn't an official game when I saw Tom smoking a cigar. This is a crappy side-scroller that opens right away with a bunch of jumping frogs that you can barely avoid and can barely hit with your shitty weapon. But the real gem of this game is the control scheme. You duck by holding down, but how do you crawl? Down left and down right? No, that's for running, stupid! You crawl by holding down and A! But it's so easy to die that you're best off just quitting before you need to know that. There are 4 NES Angry Birds homebrews on here. One is a sliding block puzzle game where they had to give you 99 lives and a suicide button. One is the same game but with only 3 lives in case you hate yourself. One is a platformer that doesn't scroll far enough to avoid damage, and the 4th is actual Angry Birds with exactly 5 directions that you can shoot and 0 control over how hard you shoot. Guys, I admire the effort, but if you have to nerf it down that hard, just why bother? But I know that there's only one way to cap things off with a bang. I'm going to show you one of the most baffling homebrews on the system. A game that utterly made my jaw drop, and if you're a longtime fan of the channel, it'll make yours drop too. For our final game, feast your eye holes on Mortal Kombat 5. Some insane madman tried to port Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero onto the Sega Genesis! Oh yeah! Someone with frostbite on the brain liked that travesty enough to remake it! But not enough to spell combat with a K. I swore that hell would freeze over before I revisited this game, but it's time to put this cold case on ice once and for all. The game opens in the Monk's Temple where you're trying to steal the map of elements. The dev couldn't be asked to make sprites for the enemies, so instead you fight Kano and his 24 clone brothers. So many rooms in this stage you have to fight 3 Kanos in a row before you're allowed to leave. And because the game is chintzy as all hell with its healing items, you have to kill all 3 on 1 life bar. So if you just really fucking hate Kano, here's your chance to mass murder him in cold blood. The combat is garbage. This isn't a mod of a pre-existing Mortal Kombat. They tried to build it from scratch and failed hard. I can't get any special moves to work, and you only have 2 attack buttons. While you do have kicks and punches that you can throw while jumping, they only seem to work about 10% of the time if I'm lucky. Mostly you push attack buttons in the air and nothing happens. So in case the combat in Mythologies didn't suck enough, now they've stripped most of your moves out of it. Now you're probably wondering, why do you only have 2 attack buttons if this is a Genesis hack and the Genesis controllers had 3 buttons? Well, because that 3rd button is used to turn you in place, just like it does in the real game. As much as the turning sucked on ice in MK Mythologies, it was kinda necessary for when you'd fight multiple people or just wanted to run past enemies and ignore them. But here, you only ever fight 1 guy at a time, and the game doesn't let you run away from fights. The turning function has been rendered completely worthless, but they wasted a button on it anyway! You wanna know what else they kept from the base game? That stupid-ass jump where you have to hop onto a balcony and then bump off, or else you die instantly from the fall. Oh, and the instant kill booby traps that you can barely avoid. It'd be a stone-cold bummer if we left those out. The controls are so trash that trying to advance and then back up to trigger these traps has a good chance of making you jump. I'm not kidding. There was one fight where I got backed into a wall and I actually got stuck in the boundary between two rooms. I put the two Kanos on ice, it lets me out into the previous room, and then when I go back, I have to repeat the two Kano fights! So if nothing else, this pile of ass is glitchier than the base game. I eventually found something of an exploit to survive the combat. See, Kano has also given up projectile attacks cold turkey, so he has to get in close to land any hits. So I just duck, wait for him to advance on me, and kick so that he walks into the attack over and over. It takes luck and some special timing, but it works. The game isn't entirely cold-hearted. You can bump the number of lives and continues up to 6 if you set the difficulty to easy. The actual game cuts off early for playing it on easy, but the other modes give you 3 lives and 1 continue. I don't care that much if I'm locked out in the cold. Also, the game has a password system, but I didn't get a password for beating the first level, so odds are good the dev just forgot to actually use it. The dev either loved or hated Kano so much they forgot you're supposed to fight Scorpion at the end of the stage. You just grab the map, kill 4 more Kanos, and leave. They couldn't even leave the story in the game, since you're just asked politely to try the next level, and then you're in the sewer water temple. So that's one positive. They completely skipped the wind stage where you fight Fujin in a bad Thor cosplay. And you can tell the game was heavily playtested from the fact there's a major typo in the level 2 text. Oh hey, in level 2 it's Sonya who's been duplicated on mass to serve as the enemies. Sorry, the sports bra look doesn't work on the cold-hearted. The water temple is a friggin' maze where loads of paths lead to dead ends or need a key to open. Although one door that takes a key just let me drop through the ground for some reason. The real bitch here is that the game does not track which enemies you've defeated. Every room you try to move through, you have to fight 3 Sonyas to leave it. You beat them, find out the next room is a dead end, and to go back, you have to fight another 3 Sonyas! And there are barely any health pickups. If you don't abuse the living hell out of save states like I did, you'd be completely hosed trying to get anywhere. And after crossing half the damn stage and fighting at least 20 damn Sonyas, I still hadn't found a damn checkpoint! So when I inevitably die, I get sent all the damn way back to the start of the level. And a crucial path through the stage involves careful jumping over death balls, so that'll suck your lives out too. But the worst part of all of this, you eventually start fighting green Sonyas who have their projectile attack. Sweet crap do they have their projectile attack. They use it a lot, hosing you down with fireballs to melt the snowman. Oh, and enemies are invulnerable in mid-attack animation, so if Sonya's in the process of blowing, you can't land a hit. Anyway, upon seeing this, I experimented some more with the controls. You can do jump kicks, but you have to completely release all directions on the D-pad before it'll work, and you do have Sub-Zero's Ice Blast, but it only works maybe 10% of the time because the PAP 1's controller is complete horse crap! And even trading up to a PS4 controller, it only worked about half the time. It's friggin' ridiculous! My best bet for killing Sonya is just to back them into the corner and stun lock them with carefully timed kicks every time they recover from flinching. 'Cause sure, blocking your face prevents getting kicked in the abs. You want an ice pack for that? Well, I buckled down and made my own map so that I could keep track of all the dead ends and where I needed to go, how to avoid as many enemies as possible so I could conserve my resources and stay alive, and narrowed down exactly where I needed to go to find all the keys and beat this damn game. This map is huge, and I kept finding ways to climb down, 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 until something weird happened. I found another door that takes the exact same key. And the more I fill in the map, the more I realize I'm in the exact same stretch of dungeon as where I started. This is the crude map that I was drawing as I played the game. This stretch of dungeon up here is pixel for pixel exactly the same as this part of the dungeon down here. If you keep going down, the game will loop forever because it drops you down back to the top of the stage without any clue that it's done so. I even got one of the rooms to glitch so that it stopped spawning enemies, and I ran into the exact same glitchy room. Everywhere I go is either a dead end or loops backwards. There are no keys, no paths forward. There is no way out of this level. I've read online that there are supposed to be 4 levels and the final boss is Sindel because Quan Chi and Shinnok didn't have Mortal Kombat 3 sprites to steal. But I'm calling it. This game can freeze in hell where it belongs. And that was the PAP 1, an actually pretty decent bootleg console loaded with varied and interesting games, some piles of crap, and a small handful of bootleg software. The sick thing is, I'd actually recommend tracking one down if you're curious. You get a whole lot of value for the package, except for the fact that these consoles are so cheaply made that for all I know, it'll burn your house down if you forget to unplug it when you're done using it. I never thought I had to take a console not exploding for granted. But hey, that's the magic of buying Chinese bootlegs, I guess.